Hello. As we continue with our discussion with language and development, we will now have our discussion with the pragmatic and semantic developments. So when we say pragmatic development of a language, so it deals with the use of the language in social contexts. When it comes to semantic, it deals with the meaning of the language. So how these things develop. So for early language, so we are now pertaining to the infant stage down to the toddler stage. They would start with the primitive speech acts. So these are patterns in young children's vocalizations and gestures to convey intent. So the use of their language would be expressed through vocalization and through their gestures. A single gesture or a single vocal or verbal pattern that conveys intention. That's a primitive speech act. There are different categories that describe the general purpose of a language. So these categories would not actually happen at the same time. Say for example, if you're in the toddler part, there are just categories that you are capable of doing. And as you proceed up to the last end or for your adult stage, so tendency is that you can use all of the pragmatic categories. So the first category is the control. So language is used to show control. It functions to make demands and requests and to protest and direct others. Next is representational. This is used to discuss entities and events and to ask for information. So compared to a child, to a baby, so the baby could use the first category, which is control, and later on when he or she becomes a toddler, he is then capable of doing the first and the second category. For the third category, it is also available for a child or for a toddler to do. And also, this is also for an infant. An infant is also capable of doing this category, which is the expressive category. Language may be used to accompany play, to exclaim, and to express feelings and attitudes. Next, social category. So the language includes greetings, farewells, and to express feelings or attitudes. Next is the tutorial part. The language consists mostly of practice with language forms. And the next is the procedural. This is when the language is used to maintain communication by directing attention or by requesting additional or misinterpreted information. How is concept formation being developed in a child? Or the meaning of a word being developed or being formed in a child? There are hypotheses that would explain the concept formation, starting with the semantic feature hypothesis. We also have the functional core hypothesis. We have the associative complex hypothesis and the prototypic complex hypothesis. So we will explain each hypothesis that would explain the meaning formation or the concept formation in a child. To start with the semantic feature hypothesis, from the word semantic feature. So this proposes that all reference can be defined by a universal set of semantic features, such as inanimate or animate or human or non-human. The child establishes meaning by combining features that are present and perceivable in the environment, such as the shape, the size, the movement, taste, smell, and hearing. Say for example the word dog. So the meaning for the word dog for a child would then be established by looking at how the dog looks like. So the dog would be furry. So the meaning for a dog could be furry with 4 legs and a tail. And During early years, the meaning of a dog would then rely on the kind of dog that the child has. So anything that they could see, but they could also perceive it in the environment. Say for example, when the child would hear the barking of the dog, so the child could then identify that the barking is related to that dog. So when he hear the word, or when he hears the bark of the dog, then the child would say dog or doggy. Next hypothesis is the functional core hypothesis. It is the motion features rather than the static perceptual features that are salient and from which the child derives meaning. The child begins meaningful speech by naming objects that embody a high degree of movement or he or she can manipulate. Say, for example, the ball. So, the ball, what is the salient movement of that ball? So, he could then say kick. So, the word kick would then be developed because of the object, which is the ball, that he or she can manipulate. And through that, it's not just about the dog, which is circle, which is red, but then it's more on the motion features, like it bounces or he or she can kick the ball. Next, associative complex hypothesis. So in relation with Vygotsky's theory, so a associative complex hypothesis, each successive use of the word shares some feature with a central instance or core concept. So a child may produce the word baby in the presence of a younger infant, extend it to self, and to pictures of himself or herself, and to books with pictures. So not anymore with the actions or the movements or how the baby would look like, but the baby would try to relate himself or herself to that word, just baby, which they can see in pictures or anywhere. Next, prototypic complex hypothesis. So the child's underlying concept includes a central reference or prototype. So there is already a, shall we say, a symbol or a reference to a certain object. Usually the referent most frequently used with the adult speech model and the first referent for which the word was used. The closer the new instance is to the prototype, the more likely it is to be labeled by that symbol. So when the adult would normally call that thing furniture, so just by looking to the referent which the adult use, then he would mean that would be the couch. But the closer the symbol to the prototype, that would then be included as the meaning of the word furniture. Say for example, near the couch would then be a lampshade. So it's then considered as one or related to the prototype that you want, that the child would mean, because the closer the new instance is to the prototype, the more likely it is to be labeled by that symbol. Then we will have the semantic class distinction. So the words or the differences of the meaning of the words. They have this substantive and relational categories. When we say substantive words, this refer to specific entities or classes of entities that have certain shared perceptual or functional features. So, based with the hypothesis that we have a while back, this would relate to the semantic feature and the functional core hypothesis. Next, relational words, or this would coincide with your semantic, the associative complex and the prototypic complex hypothesis, which refers to relations that an entity shares with itself with another entity. In relation to itself, an entity can exist or not exist, appear and disappear. So that's relational words. We also have reflexive or relational words. So this mark existence, non-existence, disappearance, or recurrence. So examples of these words are this, there, uh-oh, gone, and another. There are also action relational words, the way that different objects relate through movement or action. Actually, a child already has these protoverbs. So these are actually the child's first action type words. Though they don't really function as verb when you try to look at the word, but then the child would mean it as an action. Say for example, in, out, we have this bye bye, like up and down. So these are actions for a child. No, like what they've said, for you to to expect the child to develop correct utterances with the word, with verbs. Say for example, you should not say, when the child is about to pick something and you will say no, or the child would go out and you would say no. It is said that it is much better when you say don't, so that when the word is being developed, the child would say don't pick, don't go out, instead of saying no out, no pick. So to continue, there are also location relational words. This describe the directional or spatial relationships of two objects. The child is more likely to comment on a knock at the door as door. It's because the action, I mean, the word supposedly is knock, but then it's by the through the direction, the child would normally look at the knocking as the door. So that would then happen if you knock at the door. So it depends on how the child understands it. And last is the possession relational words. An object is associated with a certain person. This would normally happen upon a child. They would really look at the things owned by a certain person. Say, for example, a pair of slippers owned by her grandfather. So instead of calling it slippers, the child would say grandpa's or mama's. So there is already the meaning of the word would be on the owner. That's possession relational words. Next is attribution relational words. Mark the attributes, characteristics, or differences between similar objects, such as big, little, dirty, hot, funny, and yucky. So the thing or the meaning of a word would depend on the attribute of that certain word. Say for example, when the child would see a clown. So the meaning in the child's mind for a clown is not just how the clown would look like, but how the clown would act. So you would say that when they would mean clown, that means it's funny. When say vegetable or veggies, when the child doesn't like to eat veggies, then you would say that's yucky. So that's attributional relational words. So order of appearance. First words that would come out would be pure performatives. So these are words which are performed with gestures. Say for example, hi or bye bye. This would be followed by nomination of substantive words, existence, non-existence, disappearance, recurrence, and negation. This would also be followed by action function, develops next, followed by attribution, location, and possession functions. Then we will now go to preschool pragmatic and semantic development. So we'll start with pragmatic development. So in preschool, in general, children learn language within a conversational context. So everything would be developed through a dialogue basis with the child and the adults. Then the chief personal conversational partner is an adult or usually a parent. So what are these conversational contexts? So within mother-child conversations, the child begins to learn to maintain a conversational flow and to take the listener's perspective. So whenever they decide to use the language, they would see to it that the language that they use, or the context, should maintain the flow of the conversation. What are these skills in conversation for a child? First is register. So by age 4, children can assume various roles, demonstrates motherese to address younger children. Pitch and loudness levels are used to denote differing roles. So they like to do role playings whenever you will talk to a child normally by age 4. So they would like to take the role of a mother perhaps, or the role of a father in a conversation. Next. So another child's conversational skill is the contingent queries. Young preschoolers are more likely to respond and to requests for clarification that follow their own requests for action rather than to those that follow their assertions or declarations. Next skill, conversational skill, is the topic introduction, maintenance, and closure. So repetition is one tactic used by preschoolers to remain on a topic. Say for example, in this conversation, the adult said, "Later we'll go to the store for daddy's birthday present." The child would say, "Go store for daddy's present." Adult, "Uh-huh. Should we get him a new electric razor?" Child, "Yeah, new razor." As we notice in this dialogue, the child would just normally repeat the topic being mentioned by the adult. But that is one way for them to stay or to maintain the dialogue that they have with their partner or their adult companion. Next conversational skill is the presuppositional skill. The process whereby the speaker makes background assumptions about the listener's knowledge. So in here, the child would then assume that you knew about what he or she is talking about. And in general, the preschool child becomes adept at knowing what information to include, how to arrange it, and which particular lexical items and linguistic forms to use. So therefore, the child would just adjust the information that he or she is about to share to the listener. So he would then take into consideration the listener's knowledge in that particular topic that he or she will about to share. Next, directives and requests. The purpose is to get others to do things for the speaker. "Stop that. Could you get the phone?" That's an example of indirect conventional. "Phew, it's hot in here." That's indirect and non-conventional. So in the first one, that's a directive. It means the speaker would directly express what he want the the person that is pertaining to do. "Could you get the phone?" That is, we don't know who is it pertaining to. That is why it's indirect. But conventional, because the purpose is clear that the person that he was talking to would want him to get the phone for him. "Phew, it's hot in here." Though it's indirect because he is not particularly talking to a certain person. He is not directing it to somebody. But then it's also non-conventional because what he means here is to request something, because it's already hot. It's hot in here. So probably the person or the child would want the person listening to get him cold drinks, or it could be turn on the fan or aircon for that matter. So that is directives and requests. Next is deixis. So these terms used to direct attention, to make spatial contrasts, and to denote times or participants in conversation from the speaker's point of view. So example of this are here and there, this and that, I and you, my and your. Another skill is to express intentions. So the child's language intentions are increasing in number and diversity as age increases. So the control and representational functions accounts for 70% of all child utterances. So the reason most of the time the child would mention words or make an utterance is in order for him to express his different intentions. Narratives include self-generated stories, telling of familiar tales, retelling of movies or television shows, and recounting of personal experiences. That is very particular to a preschool. They love to tell stories. Decontextualization. It is which it is when the language does not center on some immediate experience within the context. So this time the preschool would then um, share an experience that is not within the context. So it would be from the movie that they have watched or from the experiences they experienced prior to that day. So that's an example of the contextualization. Next is the semantic development. This is the semantic development of preschool. So they do fast mapping strategy in order for them to um, easily get the meaning of the words that they hear. So this enables a child to infer a connection between a word and its referent after only one exposure. So they tend to put a certain connection between words, which make it very fast for them to conclude the meaning of the word since they already created a connection between the referent. The information actually mapped is affected by both the world and word knowledge of the child. Retrieval of information may be affected by the nature of the referent, the frequency of exposure to the world, the form and content of the utterances in which it occurs, and the context. So, in order to do fast mapping and for the child to easily remember or get the meaning of the words, it should be that there would be frequency of exposure. So, you expose the child to the meaning of that word most of the time, always. And the nature of the referent, it should be that the referent would be interesting for the child, for them to easily remember the word. And they should also be made aware of the meaning of it and how to use that certain word in a certain context. Then we'll go to interrogatives. So these are now the interrogatives of a preschool child. So early question forms include what and where, followed by who and whose and which, and finally by when, how, and why. So that is then the order of the development of the WH question to a preschool child. So what and where, this would mean objective meanings, who, whose, and which, selective, and finally when, how, and why. This would then requires them to express answers which are quite long because they have to explain, like for why. So that is why the question why comes at the last. Recognition of general type of information requested may precede the ability to give acceptable and accurate answer. So that is what I'm telling you a while back, that general type of information that would be answerable by question what and where. And then ability to give acceptable and accurate answers. This would pertain to the question who, whose, and which. And causal questions may be difficult for the child to respond because of the reverse order thinking required in the response. Next, we'll have temporal relations. So the order of acquisition of these terms is related to their use and to the concept each represents. The child relies on knowledge of real-life sequences. Temporal terms such as when, before, since are initially used as prepositions and then as subordinating conjunctions. So in this example, in the first one, it says, "You go after me." So in this case, the temporal term after is used first as a preposition. But in the second sentence, "You can go home after we eat dinner." So this time, it is now used as a subordinating conjunction. Physical relations. So these are relational terms such as thick or thin, fat or skinny, more or less, same or different, and are difficult for preschool students to learn. The child seems to learn by accumulating individual examples of each term. So the preschool couldn't right away give the difference unless they are given examples of each term. And they will then be able to give the difference of these words. Learning and interpretation of descriptive terms is dependent on context. Locational prepositions. So prior to age 4, in, on, and over often are used predominantly as prepositions for object location, while up, down, and off are used as verb particles. When we say verb particle, it is a multi-word grammatical unit that functions as a verb, such as stand up, sit down, and take off. Next are kinship terms. So first, child treats the kinship term as part of the person's name. Say for example, the term daddy. But in the first at the first time upon the development of this word, when the child would hear Daddy Bob, they would think that Daddy Bob is one word. Next, the child gains some features of the definition of the person, but not of the relationship. So, say for example, grandmother. So, the child would then think of the feature of the grandmother instead of thinking that the grandmother could be the mother of your father or your mother. Next is the child gains a few of the less complex relationships first. Complexity may be thought of as the number of shared features. Now, let us go to the school age and adult pragmatic and semantic development. So we already have here the summary of the development of the school age children when it comes to pragmatic and semantics. In age 5, in pragmatic, they use language mostly are direct requests. They repeat for repair, begins to use gender topics. By the age 6, they repeat with elaboration for repair. They uses adverbial conjuncts now, then, so, though, and disjuncts are just rare. By age 7, they uses and understands most didactic terms. Narrative plots have beginning and end, problem and resolution. When it comes to semantic, they can now use properly terms left or right, back and front. They shift from single word to multi-word definitions. At the age 8, they can now sustain concrete topics. They can now recognize non-literal meanings in indirect requests. They begin considering other intentions. That is the pragmatic development of an 8-year-old child. Now, by 9 years old, pragmatic use of the language. They sustain topics through several turns. They address, perceive, source of breakdown in repair and produces all elements of story or grammar. They have generally completed most of syntagmatic paradigmatic shift. They begin to interpret psychological states described with physical terms cold or blue, but misinterprets. By the age 10, semantic the semantic development are they comprehend in and on use for temporal relations, and they comprehend most familial terms. So the development, when it comes to the pragmatic development at the age of 11, they can now sustain abstract topics. 20% of narrative sentences still begin with an. For semantic development, they create abstract definitions. They already have elements of conventional adult definitions. They understand psychological states described with physical terms. And by age 12, pragmatic development would then be uses adverbial conjuncts out of 4 out of 100 utterances. Otherwise, anyway, therefore, and however, and disjuncts really and probably. By the age 13 to 15, semantic development would then be they can now comprehend some proverbs. They comprehend at used for temporal relations. And for the age 16 up to 18, pragmatic development would then be they can use sarcasms and double meanings, makes deliberate use of metaphors. They know partner's perspective and knowledge differ from own. And lastly, approximately 80% word meanings. They already have 80,000 word meanings. So those are the developments present when it comes to the pragmatic and the semantic use of the language of those school age and adult. So that's the end of our topic about the pragmatic and semantic development of a person. Thank you very much.